Hi everybody. Can we get your attention? Hello. Thanks for coming out to Flyleaf Books. We're your local independent bookstore, and we appreciate you being here today with your dolls and everything. I think we wanted to start off by just getting a picture of everybody in the audience with your dolls. So
and then if you have a doll, can you please? If you have a doll, could you please like hold it up a little higher? No pressure. Lion King. Right.
Yes, Lion King.
Every song. Yeah, Lion King, the dolls, please.
Okay, wait.
There you go. And this side of the room, please. Party. Thank you. And the coconut. I think coconut counts. That's right. It's a dog for anyone unfamiliar.
All right, thank y'all. If you didn't get a book yet, we can take an order for one. We did sell out, which is awesome. Thank you. So just talk to the people up at the front. We can get you one ordered to come in. We can also get you a book plate signed tonight so that you have that to put in your copy later as a signed copy. But for now, I'm going to turn this over to Marcy Cohen-Ferris. She's the editor of Edible North Carolina, A Journey Across a State of Flavor, and the author of The Edible South, The Power of Food and the Making of an American Region. I'm just going to give it over to her, and she'll give a more proper intro.
Is this working? Can y'all hear me okay? I don't know if the mic is on. Okay, let's just do this. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And, as you know, we're here to celebrate this amazing anthology, which everybody in America that is your age is going to own. So, but American Girl Anthology, Finding Ourselves in the Pleasant Company Universe, edited by Justine and by KC. And I remember when they first brought this idea up, and I thought, yeah, that's fantastic, but I don't know how you would do that, like you barely just got your degrees and then they did it, like immediately. Wow. So it's incredible, and I've already really gone through it quite a bit, and I was your faculty in many different ways in American Studies, on Casey's doctoral committee, and on your MA thesis committee in American Studies, and this is very much an American Studies book. And project really, and I want you to tell me later if there are any American Studies classes on American Girl.
Oh.
Not yet.
Not yet. But they'll soon be teaching that, I know. So just so exciting, but the writing is incredible, the essays are amazing, 17 essays, and the introduction, I think. 16.
That sounds
incredible.
Yeah.
But very powerful writing. So let me introduce them and tell you a little bit more about Justine Orlovsky-Schnitzler is a writer, a folklorist, and a Yiddishist. She earned her MA in folklore from UNC in 2021, and her thesis was published in the inaugural issue of the Journal of Jewish Folklore and Ethnology. She is a frequent contributor to Lilith magazine, which is focused on Jewish women's cultures and experience. And her work has also been featured in Southern Cultures through UNC, the Jewish Women's Archive, Inkavib, which is the Yiddish-focused journal, the Bitter Southerner, and the New York Times. Just the New York Times. Her essay, Yiddish and the Jewish Voice in the Zone of Interest, is a 2025 American Association for Jewish Journalism Award winner in criticism. She lives in LA right now with her husband, Dr. Max Kramer, who is here. And,
wow, yeah.
And it's been a long He's an ethicist and philosopher. And soon they'll be hopefully moving back to North Carolina. KC Hysmith is a food scholar and a writer who focuses on the intersection of food history and gender and digital media. She has written for the Boston Globe, for Food 52, Gastronomica, Peter, and so much more. She's the co-author and editor of many books on food culture, including When Southern Women Cook, published in 2024, really fantastic volume. Edible North Carolina with Marcy Cohen-Ferris. And also you co-wrote the Salt Lock Seafood Joint Cookbook with Chef Ricky Moore, which is fantastic. She has a PhD in American Studies from UNC, and very much that looks at the cake is not the sole part of it, but this cake here also is very strongly an expressive.
The cake you ate tonight, the baker does show up on my dissertation. So
My
she's like a
gosh.
through line of my life.
Right, and that is?
She had to go home. She had her little one with her. It's Emily Shevs of Sugar Lumps. Find her on Instagram.
Tell us a little bit about the cake, though, about the symbolism on it.
Oh, that's a Justine thing.
Oh, okay.
Well, it was coconut flavored.
Oh.
Which, if you think about it too hard,
Apologies for any allergies.
I guess it could be morbid, but I don't choose to think of it that way. I think it's a celebration of coconut.
Okay.
This is a 2003 coconut.
Okay. And Casey, just to finish up her intro, she has an MLA also in gastronomy from Boston University. She lives in Carborough with her husband, Josh Gant, who is here with their amazing, amazing children, Ezra and Avery. Yes. So they've all made this possible. And Casey does not own an American Girl doll.
I don't.
No. So it made her very objective.
Completely unbiased apology.
But it's so nice to see everybody here, and I just want to thank the dolls for taking the effort to get here, because it was not easy. Yeah.
And dressing up.
Yeah,
too.
dressing up, they all look fabulous. All right, so I thought, well, first of all, I figure, are these folks maybe the second generation of they're not the founding generation of consumers.
There might be a mix.
First, second, third generation, but really have all experienced the American Girl phenomenon in really, really powerful ways, and understand what these dolls and what their narratives and what their stories have really meant about American girlhood and about American womanhood as well. And so your essays and the incredible essayists who are part of this volume, scholars, historians, musicians, folklorists, writers, I mean, so many different backgrounds, and we'll talk about those, but really came together in very powerful voices. So you're all those generations, and now you're also, so you experience a doll, but now you're grown up into this American woman and others, and with partners, with children, with jobs, writing your own books, pursuing your own professions. And it's just, I think, an incredible, it's so powerfully shaped even the many current generation of historians and scholars.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the essays that I think resonates for a lot of folks is an essay written by a historian who talks about what you're kind of describing here, which is called the Felicity generation. Some of you might have heard this term, especially if you're in academia, and it's basically talking about this phenomena of these young people, mostly girls, finding these books, having these dolls, having some kind of connection with American Girl. It can be anything, because I didn't have a doll, and so I still had this connection. And then becoming historians or scholars or anything that kind of touches on America, or really anything. It doesn't have to stay there. And there's this whole generation of women in the field, and you can see little graphs that correlate with the debut of American Girl dolls on the market, and kind of 20, 30 years later, a lot more women PhDs in the humanities and the social sciences and things like that. So it's a really cool trajectory to follow.
That is fascinating, and I loved how the historian, who wrote that essay?
Her name is Tara Strouch, thank you.
Tara Strouch, and how she talked about how she felt, she said that this is how she got into the field, but people were amazed that she would admit it, and who hasn't experienced that kind of thing,
right?
In so many different ways. But I know everybody basically knows the story of American Girl dolls and of the company, but could you just tell us kind of briefly, for those that might not know, what was unique, what was the founding story of it about Pleasant Rowlands? And actually, I also think I was at Williamsburg, or I was in grad school, I think when she was there in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because that was that same era of that kind of empowered social history era where she's walking around the streets trying to figure out how she's going to tell But if you could just, what's unique about these dolls?
Yeah, so there's a slightly mythologized kind of origin story that I think probably a lot of folks here are familiar with. Pleasant Rowland initially said that she wanted an alternative to Barbie. She wanted to see historically focused dolls that gave kids, and it was, aimed at girls, but I really think, again, these dolls have been played with by folks of all different genders. Something different. Now we know American Girl is now owned by Mattel. That's skipping ahead by a lot, so we're going to condense that and put that to the side for the minute. But she wanted to see really well-made accessories, really beautiful furniture for these dolls, full fleshed out stories, these characters for the historical lineup when they came out. These dolls have entire histories. I opened my Molly doll in 2003, and I've got a book, and I can read about how her dad is serving in World War II, and it's difficult on the home front, and she hates turnips, and she has, that's always stuck in my mind. I'm sure that's true for everybody here. The first time I had a turnip, I was like, Molly doesn't like these. But see how this goes.
Neither did Scarlett O'Hara.
I mean, they're good with a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of milk, the way it's done at the end of the book, right? She's right.
If only Molly knew.
If only Molly knew. They're fully fleshed out, and I think something that we talked a little bit about in the introduction and the conclusion is that Barbie's had 100 jobs, but she's always been an ace at all of them. And I think what's different about these dolls and these stories is that they do have struggles. I mean, they're different, right?
They learn lessons.
They learn lessons. Now, their backgrounds do not always scale. They're not always comparable to each other, and that's something I think we'll also get into as well. But yeah, there's strife, there's difficulty. To bring it back to Molly, she's getting a C in mathematics, okay? She's having a hard time. Her dad's overseas, she's stressed, but they're not perfect. And I think there was something different about it's kind of this reflection of the self that it was really different at the time. And again, they have changed over time. They are different than they used to be. And I don't know if you want to,
The other thing I would say to add to that, and this is something we talk about the book both historically and kind of how that's evolved, is that these dolls were also meant to be these kinds of heirlooms. Justine touched on it in that the furniture was wooden. Yeah. The clothes were maybe not hand sewn, but they were high quality for doll clothes. The bodies, the dolls themselves were really, highly made. They've changed a lot too. And they were not cheap, which is part of the reason I didn't have a doll.
Right.
And lots of other folks didn't. And so there is this really interesting kind of correlation between the Barbie that was a fair bit cheaper or other types of dolls that were, of course, out there. So that was kind of always, from the get-go, these are going to cost more. Not necessarily in a prohibitive, exclusionary way, but there is this kind of heirloom quality that kind of was put into it from the get-go.
Yeah, my parents are here, so they can attest to this. This doll was not like an outside doll toy. Some people did. I have also seen incredible and very funny images of folks who are like, well, this is what my doll currently looks like. And, it's like she's been out through her own experience. But I mean, I've had this doll for 22 years, so, they stick around.
Yeah.
They're lasting. Hardy.
And so besides the deep kind of backstory that made the historical backstory initially, right? Because that was just how many, the original historical dolls?
Yeah, there was an original lineup, and then they added some dolls to that historical lineup, and they have backed away from the historical dolls now at this point. There is a shift. There's Girl of the Year, there's Looks Like Me dolls, you can customize them, and all of that I think does open the door for a lot of wonderful things. But it's also true that now, for a lot of the historical collections, they'll bring them back, they'll do a flash sale, it'll be like a big moment. I think they did this during COVID, where it's like you can get Molly's accessories again, because for a while they just weren't available.
Them again, this week.
There's a cash grab element, and also they knew our book was coming out. So.
They did. There's also a timeline at the beginning of the book that really, for those who are wanting to jog their memory or don't know anything about it as much, where it kind of marks this timeline that we're going through, and then marks these different historical dolls and kind of when these other types of dolls were brought in. Excuse me.
What do y'all know about Pleasant Rowland, just briefly?
I mean, that could be an entire conversation in and of itself. I mean, she's an interesting person. I don't know her personally. We can start with that. This might veer us off too far. I think she's someone who had a very clear vision for what she wanted, but she's a little bit secretive.
She's what age?
I don't know.
Let's see.
I don't want to speculate wildly. That might hurt her feelings.
She's in her 80s.
She's in her 80s.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Great. But the other, she's born in 1941.
She was a teacher, though. I think that is important. So going to Williamsburg, looking around, looking in the gift shop and saying, there's not really anything here for kids. How do we get them excited about history? Let's think about a vehicle to do that.
It's a fantastic idea. So the other thing besides a historical narrative was this whole idea of character. Mm-hmm. So what was that about? Like what kind of character, what values did the doll, the original dolls represent?
American values.
Which, we could spend a lot of time
character building
unpacking that, but they're spunky, they're brave, they struggle with things, but they come out strong on the other side. They are meant to be roughly 9 years old, I believe, at the start of their books, so these are not sexualized dolls in the same way that you might see with some other kinds. Barbies, it's kind of not a great example, though. It doesn't one-to-one compare, I think, and I don't want to call her out too early, but we have a wonderful essay about LGBTQ identity and queer American Girl, and this idea that, yes, maybe they're not talking about certain topics for this age demographic, but at the same time, kids want to see themselves in these books. So, I don't want to jump us too far ahead there, but
I meant to introduce Laura Traister, who's here with us, who's one of our essayists. And Laura wrote Interpreting, Imagining, and Inventing Queer Pasts and Futures Through American Girl, and it's an incredible essay. And then also, she couldn't be with us today, Mackenzie Kwok, but her family is here, representing her mother and sister, Kim and Pamela. And Mackenzie also went to UNC, also a folklorist, lives in New York. She wrote Ivy Ling, Corinne Tan, and Chinese American Misrepresentation in American Girl. And these are American studies.
Laura also made the bookmarks, so if you have them, thank you, Laura.
They're fantastic. But this idea of that to provide agency to girlhood in American history, that that young women, little girls should feel, I have a place within this. Within this country or within its history.
Yeah, I think, in addition to the dolls, so each doll came with a book, and then as that evolved, they started to create other various types of ephemera and books, and of course, we talk about this also in the book and how it gets tied up with consumerism and capitalism, especially when the brand got sold to Mattel and kind of was off to the races. But before then, they were trying to create these materials, which are very clearly K through 12 education, and we have another essay on that. They follow those guidelines, which obviously have changed immensely, but
the national standards.
The standards, yeah. And so they took things from that, and then also added a lot of what Pleasant, I think, thought was missing, and other scholars. I don't think she did not work in a vacuum. She really included other folks. She did a really good job of recruiting large teams that worked on different dolls. When other books came out, they taught other things that girls would have been doing during that time frame of whichever doll it was. So they were called pastimes, and so it was theater plays and various games and hoop and stick, and then cookbooks, which is what I really focused on, and that's how I learned about American Girl, was through the cookbooks. That's all American Girl was ever for me as a kid. And then I have learned so much through this process, actually, just because that was my lens. But so yeah, it gave little girls in all these different aspects who maybe didn't want a doll, couldn't access the doll, didn't see themselves in the doll for whatever reason, didn't have that identity click. There were all these other ways that they did try to meet girls where they were and give them some fodder to kind of go out and learn more on their own.
It's so interesting too how Pleasant Rowlands, as an educator, and then coming to Colonial Williamsburg in the 1980s, where that was really a center of social history. A really beating heart center of the social history movement, and so she's part of that too, really, in that kind of because it goes from grade school all the way up to university and higher ed, and she's taking those values of social history, of everyone's history matters, history from the ground up, all people, and saying girls are a part of that too. which is, it's really interesting how it all comes together that way.
And I was going to say, I think what thing that she picked up on that I think, especially for children that isn't necessarily covered in this K through 12 existing world of things, is the material culture of it all. Like, she focused on things that would matter to a kid, these little things that matter, to grown-ups too, but things that grown-ups maybe think kids aren't interested in, whether it's, the fabric and the clothes and how things are made and the sundries that are sold in the shops and listing them out. And that not only taught kids what was and wasn't available, but it's the kind of little mundanity things that kids are really interested in and they really glom onto, like the turnips. Like, there's a perfect example there.
Still thinking about it. Still. But they did, there was a mold, and that we do talk about as well. And literally a face mold, right? But I mean, even just in the structure of the books for the historical doll, they get to Kaya, who's an indigenous doll, and they had this structure where there'd be a Christmas story for each doll, and they went, okay, well that doesn't really work. That's not something this person would have celebrated. So they adjust, they change. They don't always get it right. I mean, that's certainly a part of this anthology as well. Similarly, they introduce a Jewish character. They say, okay, she's going to have a Hanukkah outfit. We can quibble about this, that maybe not an important holiday for her to have an outfit for. Maybe Passover would have been more appropriate, but I digress. That's personal to me. But it's interesting because they set up this structure, and then they bring in historical experts. They bring in folks to write these books, and done an incredible job by and large. But it's never been perfect, and there's definitely, you talked a little bit about Mackenzie's essay a minute ago. There have definitely been, I think, places where folks have said, I don't see myself represented here, and it's not good enough to just have a looks like me doll. I want to hear a story that speaks to something I would have experienced.
Yeah, Mackenzie said, imagine what Ivy Lang's experience could be if her story were regarded as a pivotal Asian American historical moment.
Right. So they had these best friend dolls that I'm sure a lot of folks here are familiar with. You've got Samantha Parkington, wealthy orphan in the Edwardian era, and her Irish sidekick, who is a domestic, but that's okay. Nellie O'Malley. We have a phenomenal essay about Nellie O'Malley in this book. Because
how an American girl, Irish girl became white.
Exactly. The racialization of the facial molds. Nellie used this ethnicized facial mold that was also used for Rebecca Rubin, the Jewish American doll. And there's a lot to unpack there.
The Jews, indigenous folks, Asian folks, all
different
and the Irish.
facial mold.
All in the same mold.
But what amazed me also about Sheena Rotman-Wynn's essay, Belonging in Indigeneity, an American Girl Universe, that was the introduction of the first Native doll. And it debuted in Idaho on a Nez Perce Reservation in 2002, and Mattel had to create a new face mold because
so they the Nez Perce Nimipu people smiling like with your teeth was seen as a sign of aggression, and all of the dolls have a default like toothy smile. So
American Girl teeth.
Yeah, the American Girl teeth. Kaya was the first doll that her lips are closed. So as a mold, they had to create a new. Yeah, she's right there. There's Kaya. Oh, amazing! Thank you for bringing her.
Yeah, the Nimipu do not show their teeth while smiling. So it just made so much sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's really powerful to me. So can you tell us, step back a little bit, what's the origin of this volume? How did the idea for this?
I guess I have to keep talking. Drink some water. That's great. Oh, there's water here. Look at that. You should always look around. I went to the American Folklore Society conference in 2022. Mackenzie Kwok, who's not here, we talked about her a bit tonight. We thought it would be fun to do a fun presentation as opposed to something a little stodgy. And we were both obsessively following Modern American Girls on Instagram or Helicity Merriman or any of these meme accounts that really started to pick up steam. We thought, this is American culture, this is folklore, right? This is interesting. And the more we talked about it, the more we kind of dared each other to try and come up with something scholarly. But what we learned is that everybody had something to say about American Girl. So we gave this presentation to a pretty packed room. And I met the press rep who said, you really probably have a book here if you want to do it. And I said, that's great, I would love to do that, and I definitely can't do it alone. I should definitely do it with someone who's so experienced and has edited so many volumes.
And I said, I never had a doll, Justine.
I said, that doesn't matter. You can put, again, very objective. You can come at this with a totally scholarly lens. And it really was off to the races from there because, and it was really hard. We had to say no to essays due to space. I mean,
What was it like when you put out the call for essays?
It was a deluge, like in a wonderful way. Like we had people who just were so excited to send in a pitch that it was like, this is a place marker.
Yeah.
I'm gonna send something in later. Please just hold my spot. And we're like, okay, we're not reading anyone until they all come in. So we had people who were just so excited, and typos, lovely little typos in their emails because they were clearly just so excited and wanted to send this thing right away. That obviously didn't count against them. And we had so many people who had similar experiences, and so that was really heartwarming, but at the same time had to pick just one or maybe two people. But it was also really cool to see how many people shared very similar things and came from all sorts of spaces. We had people overseas who were not American writing about this. We have someone who's not American who wrote for this. And it was just a really lovely kind of like burden to have. And the burden of having to pick of who got to be in there. And we easily have enough that we could have a second volume quite easily.
And where does this fit kind of on the shelf of criticism in scholarship about American Girl?
There's not too much. I mean, there's one other fabulous book that we're very
many people
Yes, Emily Zaslin,
quoted from.
Playing with America's Doll. There's also Dolls of Our Lives, which is a more popular text, memoir type deal from folks who run a wonderful podcast. I think actually they blurb the back of the book, so gotta shout them out. But it is rather new. I mean, I think there was definitely some skepticism again initially, saying like, is there enough here? Are people going to want to read this? But again, we easily could have done 2 volumes. Some folks have asked about that. My lines are open.
Casey, let me ask you about food as an expressive language in the American Girl. Yeah, tell us, how did you kind of shape, your cookbook interest?
Yeah, so well, first of all, the American Girl cookbooks, if you're not familiar with them, are written in very approachable style. They're written for 8 and 9-year-olds. So, at the beginning they say you need an adult to help you with the oven. It's just good advice. So they're written, it was something I read when I was 8 and 9. They were a couple years out, and you could check out all of them from the library. I don't know if anyone remembers seeing the library shelf of American Girl dolls, but it was quite literally like a whole shelf because they're thin little volumes. And the cookbooks had just a lovely mix of historical recipes. They have these little blurbs, these little sidebars that kind of taught you about like what a specific ingredient was and why you're not using it in this recipe because your mom's not going to be able to find it in the grocery store. But Sue, it smells like this, or whatever it was. And so it taught you history at the same time, and maybe updated a recipe here and there, but had a few realistic, authentic recipes as well. And I remember that being one of the very first cookbooks I ever cooked with, and my co-author for that one is one of my friends and food scholars, Esther Martin, and that was her first introduction to food and cooking as well, were these, she had several dolls and she had all the cookbooks. So we had talked about this, and she actually texted me frantically when this call came out and was like, someone needs to write about Felicity's queen buns. Don't worry, it'll be us. But I was surprised to see that no one else no one pitched anything about food. And for me, American Girl is food, and that's all I knew it as. But now as a food scholar, I know like these are hugely instrumental works to teach young people and old people, older people, all ages, all American girls, about how important food is for learning about a culture, or even somebody just in a different area of your country.
It's interesting how food studies, folklore, folklore traditions of the different dolls and who they represent, social history, it all comes together. So food is not dismissed in these stories at all.
It absolutely
it's
is not.
Really a language.
It really is, and whether that's in each, like I said, each character has stories that got fleshed out into more stories. There's a birthday book, there's a Christmas or a holiday book, and a learns a lesson book, and all the different ones, right, for each doll. And there's food in each one of them. And some of it's a little more prominent in others. Kaya has a lot because it's a lot of the indigenous culture. And obviously as time goes on, you have people doing less like collecting and sustaining of the food and just going to the grocery store. But even in Molly's, it's rationing and victory gardens and things like that.
What's really cool too is they remind me so much in a way of my generation. Would have been the folks that are more my age maybe knew Lois Linsky's writing, and she was also, she went around the country kind of in the 1940s, in the 1950s. Has anybody read any of her books? Close to my age. So there was like Strawberry Girl, Mississippi Delta Girl, all these regional, girls and boys. And Lois Linsky would go to schools and write educators and ask if she could come and spend time, and teachers, and ask if she could come and spend time. Like she came to Mississippi County, where I grew up in Blytheville, Arkansas, and really met, again, it was the era. It was New Deal, it was the Depression. She did both all black and white Mississippi County, so she really caught that. But food was important. It was also an era, the 1940s, of a kind of a democratizing of American history. And Lois Linsky wanted to give children that same agency.
Yeah, and I think Pleasant Rowland and the teams that she assembled really, really honed in on that, and they found ways to do that with food, but other things too. We have a great essay in here on sartorial choices, because not only is that discussed prominently in the books, it's obviously like a big deal for the dolls themselves. They have very semi-accurate period clothing, and then also lots of options that you can buy more of. And then they came out with clothes that you could buy for your own body as a little kid. And then, they were off to the races from there. Yeah. Now they have Harry Potter.
Jenny's ice cream. They don't close for that. But.
Yeah, they've got like branded collaborations, which is a little, I'll say it, I think it's a little weird. It's strange. It doesn't feel 100% like what I remember the brand feeling like, but at the same time, it's a brand. At the end of the day, they are making money, and that's kind of neither here nor there. It just is what it is. I did go to the American Girl store in LA not that long ago, and they have like a little branded Jenny's ice cream truck. It's like $400, and it's like,
I really want it.
Does it drive? It doesn't drive. And I mean, they're 9 years old, right? So they don't have their licenses. But it felt very limiting in its own way, because you think it's very, very expensive, and it is very specifically an ice cream truck for the doll to play with. So that's kind of just one story you can do. When I was a kid, I would have gotten a cardboard box and been told, that's your ice cream truck. You can use your imagination.
I'm going to watch the time here because I want to open it up to let everybody ask questions too, and I want y'all to give us a little sample from it as well.
Yeah, please do.
I have a reading prepared.
It's short. I think, so there's lots of ways to approach this book, and I think my favorite part of this book, aside from my own chapter that I wrote, is this paragraph, because I think it just kind of gives you, you can really use this book as a choose your own adventure, whether you are someone who's always loved American Girl or are brand new to it and your partner's like, you need to learn about this. There is something here for everybody. So this is tips and tricks for reading an American Girl anthology. Inspired by all of the publications, imaginative play materials, and the recurring invitation to find ourselves in the American Girl universe, this anthology encourages readers to start with whichever essay or thematic section they think best fits their experience. Did you dog-ear all the latest and greatest accessories in every issue of the American Girl catalog? Start with the section Consuming American Girl. Maybe you never had an American Girl doll or didn't grow up with a character that made you feel seen. Then the section Who Gets to Be an American Girl is for you. Fans of the main character learns a lesson trope will enjoy the section American Girl Teaches a Lesson, which is full of essays expanding on lessons we were taught, lessons we never got, and lessons that need unlearning. And for readers new to American Girl and unclear on why it matters to its fans and how it serves as a powerful influence on contemporary culture, there's Making American Girl Our Own, featuring interview between editor Justine and the creators of the American Girl meme account Felicity Merriman, which might just inspire you to find yourself once again, or for the first time, in the complex, captivating, and ever-expanding Pleasant Company universe.
Go check out the Felicity Merriman
Yeah.
IG. I went down that rabbit hole.
Disclaimer.
And what did you
It's
think?
not for children.
I was like, what's going on?
That is
here?
legitimately, that account is how I learned.
Should I
that
read
they-
the second?
Well,
Yes.
it's how I learned they'd elected a new pope. And this is kind of
And also how Henry Kissinger died.
Oh yeah, you needed to read that. You didn't read it.
Yeah, here. It's. I guess it's for just that. So.
Okay. Well, I'll just jump in then. In seemingly unrelated news, barely 12 hours before the Barbie collaboration with American Girl launched, Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, died at his home in Connecticut. You know where this is going. As soon as the news broke widely, AG parody account Felicity Merriman sprang into action. If this is how you found out Henry Kissinger is dead, the post on Instagram read, "Be honest." On X, formerly known as Twitter, user Tyler McCall confessed to being one such individual. "I found out Henry Kissinger died from one American Girl doll account on Instagram," she wrote, exactly what Pleasant Rowland intended when she invented them in 1986. Others agreed. "Felicity is exactly how I found out," user Bree replied, "and I printed out the screenshot so I would always remember." She attached a photo showing she had in fact done exactly that. We don't have an image of that in the book, but we really should have sprung for that. It's really beautiful.
I think we couldn't find it because Twitter was dying.
Finally, obviously, the introduction of an official brand collaboration between Mattel subsidiaries and the death of one of the most reviled war makers of the 20th century are not, strictly speaking, linked. But they are 2 points in a broader constellation of American capitalism that keeps American Girl in the frequently absurd zeitgeist of the 21st century. The internet excels at collapsing seemingly disparate worlds together, to the point that at least a few hundred people learned of a major world event from a doll meme account.
Wow, amazing. Thank you. Really, really well written. Beautiful. Many of the essays also talk about that American Girl dolls of color, particularly, were often released as allegedly, the company responding to kind of either acts of racism or a racist moment, or like Mackenzie talks about the anti-Asian American violence that took place during COVID, at the beginning of COVID. And would that have been Corinne?
Yeah, so with this doll of the year, it explicitly discusses anti-Asian racism, racism against Asian Americans, and it's talking about COVID. It's saying, like, this is how Corinne finds her voice and is able to stand up for herself. And Mackenzie's really asking the question of, well, why did it take until now to have this story, and why couldn't it stand on her own? Why didn't we have a Girl of the Year who is Asian American that doesn't have to talk about COVID?
Right.
I mean, it's a fair question, and certainly I think we obviously have a wonderful essay about Addie and all of the thought that went into her creation, but also where it missed the mark. The writer who discusses Addie, says, for a long time, if I wanted a Black American Girl doll, I could buy Addie, but her story was so different than every other character's, not to pit them against each other, but you're saying, like, well, Molly's dad's away on the home front and Samantha lost her family, but Addie's walking and escaping slavery on foot. Move this one out.
Yeah.
Which is to say, there's a difference. And I think, there you go. There are places where I think they've really risen to the occasion, and then certainly there are places where they have failed to do so. And I think that our writers really address this very eloquently.
Yeah, I thought that was really powerful in all of the essays, because they really go after the idea that, well, also it's kind of it's a scholarly or scholarly popular culture trope of time periods that we now really are so much more aware of, that it flattened people of color's experience largely into trauma and victimhood, and solely that's your story. And so all the essayists really push back at that and say, yeah, it's part of the story, but where's the empowerment? Where's the joy? Where is the claiming of American space? And I think that also ties into who gets to be, not only who gets to be an American Girl doll, but what part of their story do they, like if you could ask them what part do y'all want to talk about? What parts of your life do you want to tell? That are significant.
Which I think is reflected culturally, which is things that we talk about and kind of spurred this book, is that, who gets to be an American Girl, who gets to be an American Girl doll, kind of launched the meme that I'm sure lots of you know, we need an American Girl who, insert the rest here, and they can get quite weird, or specific rather, and it begs the question, well, do you this is a business and they're not going to make one that specific, but it does, it gives people this agency in this digital age to create. There's an entire meme generator dedicated to American Girl, this meme basically, and you can add the picture of the girl with the background, and any kind of phrasing you want. It kind of went off the rails, but the point of it is really powerful, and what I think a lot of our contributors pick up on, and they take it in a whole bunch of different directions to really talk about and unpackage this concept that clearly everyone was thinking. People who were, and it introduced a lot of people to American Girl for the first time this way as well.
What I think too is so wonderful about Sheena's essay talking about Indigenous identity, as an Indigenous writer, she says, I had Samantha, who for me was an Indigenous doll because I was. So I dressed her in the clothing that I made, and I put her in moccasins, and I wanted her to have this experience. And then they come out with Kaya. She's just representing one nation, out of many, many Indigenous nations in this country. And, is it even fair to say that she could be an American Girl doll? This is a pre-contact Indigenous child.
She is the American Girl.
There's a lot of questions I think that come from that, and we were so lucky to have someone who really wanted to tackle that head on, because it's tough. It's a tough conversation to have.
Yeah, they could divide them up into original and colonialists,
right?
They could have.
Yeah, Felicity is not as popular as she used to be.
No. Well, I hope you guys can just speak for a minute on now here we are in this incredibly complex political moment, and there's all this kind of revival of American exceptionalism and make America great again, and here we are with American.
But we're only going to get 2 dolls.
Yeah, we can't.
Rather than 30.
That was amazing.
I know.
That was
Good
amazing.
Press.
It did more for our press campaign.
So they don't get. They get $2.
Yeah.
But could you speak to what's happening with the politicization of in a conservative way, or on a more progressive side?
It's a big question. I mean, I think
are there divided group camps with American Girl dolls?
Oh,
yes.
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So one of several essays touch on this, but for anyone that's not doesn't know this, there's an entire community on the internet, AGIG, American Girl Instagram, and it's a huge community of collectors, of people who just have a doll and like to take it on adventures, like a Flat Stanley situation, and then people who are hardcore, they set up scenes and they create little storylines, and they have dolls that maybe they have a Samantha that they've put in different clothes and said this doll is now this identity, this person. So all of these different things, in addition, and those are kind of straight-faced approach to things, in addition to the meme accounts like Felicity Merriman and one that I'm not going to mention because I know there's children in the room. You can look it up. It's in the book. And there's just so many ways people are approaching it, and I think it's really interesting because it's very much been claimed by people, I think, that weren't necessarily allowed to claim it as children. Whether it's because they, were LGBTQ or they didn't like dolls then. I think we see a lot more boys playing with it now, a lot of grown men. There's Harry Hill?
Harry Hill.
Yeah, who made a thing about going to the American Girl place and drinking cocktails.
You can buy alcohol there.
You can buy alcohol at the American Girl place. So there's this huge push of counterculture and subculture that has kind of reappropriated these books and these characters in this universe. But at the same time, there are plenty of people who consider this to be true American stories, true American identity. They find no fault with what's been said and written, despite the fact that it is very much fictional. And so we have this really interesting dichotomy, not unlike other things. And it'll be really interesting to see how it kind of plays out, what the next Girl of the Year is going to be, what tariff impacts are going to happen. I think there's a lot of grounds for change.
Did AG Dolls show up at political rallies?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, sure,
Who Patricia sent us a picture of American Girl at a rally, or an American Girl and a knockoff, I think.
No tariffs.
Yeah, no tariffs on the dolls. And then you see them a lot at women's marches.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I think a lot of the things that Pleasant Rowland did touch on were very progressive efforts, but I think her progressive is a little different than today's progressive. I don't know her personally. Like we said, we don't know her voting habits. I have some assumptions, but things have changed pretty wildly.
So why don't we open it up to any questions? Right there.
I can talk loud enough if this is
great.
This is a sort of haphazardly put together question.
Great.
But touching on the American Girl meme IG accounts, I'm very curious because it feels like for every post, it is the sort of starter packs that come with each doll are very individualized and tailored to each doll. But they're slightly moving away from a lot of the cultural context that have created the choices for each doll. And so I'm curious if you know or have any assumptions or guesses as to how each item or situational context is created for each doll within a contemporary context, while simultaneously either drawing on her cultural background and or sort of adopting a more universalist white globalized perspective on the doll.
Do you mean for the meme accounts specifically?
Yes.
Okay. So I did talk to the ladies behind Felicity Merriman, and it was funny because one of the things they said first was we did not expect to still be doing this account. We made it and it was really fun and it felt like American Girl was having a moment again. And then we thought, oh God, I think we're gonna run out of content, and that actually hasn't happened. I mean, they're pretty active, but
and I will say that this leads to your point. The Felicity Merriman account is straight up a politics account now.
They have
guest
completely
spots with senators.
Yeah.
They go to the Hill and interview people.
One of them works on Capitol Hill. It's not just that she's decided she's a reporter with a doll account.
Such a great
power to her. I mean, it is interesting because they are so hyper specific, right, in so many ways, and I know that for them, a lot of it has been generated just by what am I interested in, what am I reading right now, what am I hearing, all right, let's talk about it. But I think you're right too that there is certainly that is one lens, right? It's two white women of a certain socioeconomic class who are making these memes and these accounts, and so I think not exclusively, but certainly that is the majority, and you do see that reflected in what they are creating. Casey, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add, and just from a material culture standpoint, thinking about how they accessorize these modern American dolls.
I guess I can talk.
Yeah.
I think they definitely, a lot of it's tongue in cheek, right? A lot of it is meant to be a commentary on whiteness and the proliferation of whiteness in American culture. So, if you'll see some of these, and what we're talking about for folks who are not familiar with it, it looks like a doll with all of her accessories around it in the picture. And they're almost all contemporary dolls. And, they'll have, for example, an Erewhon smoothie and a cup, a thing of Zin down here, and then whatever Sally Rooney has just published, and then some other paraphernalia of whatever they want, and so it's got this really interesting commentary that I think is both just again a discussion of what whiteness means in America, what Americanness means here, what youth culture means as well, because I feel Pleasant Rowland is just like what, and nonetheless, like from a material cultural standpoint, like as a scholar, like that's material culture, like it still counts.
I was going to say, just to add to that too, I think that speaks a little bit to something we talk about in the conclusion, which is that, Harry Hill's a great example of this person using the internet, and there's a whole New York Times article where he goes and purposefully gets really drunk at the New York American Girl place, right? And there's an article about it, it gets coverage in the Times. American Girl cannot engage with that as a brand, but it is driving people to the company. It is how a lot of us are engaging with it right now. So it's interesting because in some ways they're benefiting from it, but they cannot endorse that you do that.
We did ask for their input whenever we started this book, and they very politely sent us a letter back saying,
no, thank you.
No, thank you. Good luck.
Have fun.
And then we're gone.
Yeah.
Also in this climate, you'd think that even as kind of carefully progressive as the company is, or Mattel is, that they'd be sued or they'd be being pulled out of library shelves right now and out of toy stores because of their DEI.
Well,
or sued.
They've just made some changes too. So with the re-release of some historical dolls in the last, I would say 2 months, a lot of them have started arriving for folks, and then so they're getting those initial meet Kirsten, I think is the one that comes to mind as an example.
They've repatriotized themselves.
No, I think the opposite. So they've done the first Indigenous character in American Girl was not Kaya, it was Singing Bird in these Kirsten stories, and she's portrayed a certain way. They have rectified that a little bit. They've changed some of the language. They're no longer calling her Indian. They're calling her tribal name. There have been some changes made.
That's great.
Yeah. I don't think Mattel is going to bow down to any of the issues. They're too big. The tariffs are barely going to really probably mess with them.
And the consumer.
It's the consumer and the libraries and the educators that I think are really, and the fact that they hire so many, all the folks who work on the books, write the books, and work on the characters are pulled from various educational institutions. They're scholars. They're like folks like Justine and I who got our degrees in these things.
Please let me write American Girl books anyway.
They're folks from the Smithsonian who now don't have jobs. So I think that's where the pipeline is going to shut down.
And you have to think that when Stephen Miller goes, American Girl, maybe we should look, and everybody goes, no,
right?
No, not a good
Don't touch
idea.
that.
No.
I think we had another question.
We have a couple questions.
Oh goodness.
How about Laura?
Oh yeah, you can run the mic.
On the mic. Everybody else. I don't know.
Can you all speak to the global impact of the brands? Like, are these used as educational tools in other countries? Have other countries adopted? Like, I'm thinking of, I think there's a Canadian brand, like the Maple Leaf. There's also Canadian Girl Books. Okay, yeah. So do you know of any evidence of the global impact of the brand?
That's a great question. I can tell you that we've had far more people request this book or ask us how they can access it in other countries than I would have expected, particularly the UK, but we're sending a book to Australia as of yesterday, so that's very exciting. And it is fascinating because I do have some friends who live overseas who have purchased the book to support me, which is fabulous. They're like, yeah, I really don't know anything about this, but I guess I'll learn something, right? And that's certainly true, not just from this, but there really is a whole world to uncover. And I do think it's fascinating to imagine what would it be like to encounter these characters now from such a different.
Yeah, I was talking to my friend who grew up in Hong Kong, and she told me that she knew nothing about these. Still doesn't. She's 30-something like me, and but she distinctly remembers begging her dad, who was a businessman who would come to the States frequently, to bring her back American Girls. And she just wanted them because everyone else had them. Mm-hmm. So, but she I don't know if she got one. She still doesn't know anything about them. She's like, I'm going to read this and I'll learn. And I was like, cool, thanks. And so it's clearly, something, there is this popularity of, going global but like most things that children want, they just want it because other kids have it. Mm-hmm. So whether or not that it's, the actual stories made it over, I don't know. That'll be in part 2, and you can help us write that.
Julia, right here.
Thank you. This was great. Yeah, I had a question. It's mostly about Rebecca Rubin. And I'm too old to have had Rebecca, so I made Molly and Samantha Jewish because they had brown hair.
Naturally.
But none of them had curly hair at the time, I think. Anyways, yeah, I might have two questions about Rebecca. One is, like, I feel like I haven't seen or heard about dolls of other non-Christian religions. I guess Kaya has some amount of indigenous religions, but yeah, I'm wondering, I was talking to a friend about how there's no Muslim doll. It doesn't feel like they're dolls of other religions, so I'm just wondering, like, what you know about that, maybe if there are some of the girls of the year, I'm not as familiar with them. And then my other question with Rebecca is, I've only read her last book, for a paper I'm writing for Marcy, but the story in her last book, like the historical story, takes place in 1909 and 1910, but the book is set in 1915. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if that's common in the books or if they did that often, and if so, like, why?
Yeah, these are great questions. I think thank you. To the first one, I believe that there was a Girl of the Year, Indian American. I'm not certain if the religion element of that was discussed. South Asian, I don't know if, again, to assume that that doll would have had a different background. You could easily be Christian as well. I think with Rebecca, and this is something that's talked about in one of the essays, Rebecca, we actually have an essay contributor who's named Rebecca Rubin. There is no relationship, but it honestly just means American Girl really got it right. You know, to name that word. She talked a lot about as an adult collector and creator that, you know, wanting to make accessories for her doll, but not, you know, being torn between wanting Mattel to produce them. So I think that, to use the Jewish example, you know, specifically, she thought, well, I'd love to make a tallis for my doll, but I don't want the company to make a tallis. That's a religious item. There's a push and a pull. Like, what would it mean for them to make a Passover plate? You know, I think there's a lot, and that's, of course, the material part is not the entirety of it, but it's certainly a component. And yeah, you probably have.
Well, and I think something that we haven't even touched on too is that there was American Girl Club that you could subscribe to in the late 80s, early 90s, into the 2000s. You could get, there was a catalog that everyone got mailed, right? To this day, there still exists, but there was American Girl magazine. And so in that magazine, there were, it's just like peak 90s. It's wonderful. And it's, you know, it had arts and crafts. It had different, it was very highlights-like. Anyone remembers highlights? And it had recipes. It had all sorts of things. I made these little like peppermint snowmen every year with them. But in that, they also had these crafts where they would say, you know, you get this clay, get these ingredients, these colors, and you can make a Passover plate. You can make these other things. So they did, you know, that's not necessarily the perfect answer, but they did like kind of bridge some gaps there. And then I was thinking of other religious, what I find really funny is the Isabel and Nikki are Jewish and thank you.
Yeah, I saw one of them over there.
Before everyone leaves with dolls, I'd love to get like a group picture of everyone just holding their doll up too. You don't have to be in it. I just want your doll. But now we have, you know, we've come full circle. We started with Christians. We've got a Jewish person later. We've got some, you know, we don't really talk about the religious aspects of the indigenous dolls. It's there, but it's not in the same way. And then now we have Isabel and Nikki, and they're a half Jewish, half Christian household. Yeah. But then that's like all it's ever talked about. Yeah, like we don't ever talk about anything else that they do religiously, just that that's what they are.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Can you remind me the second part of your question?
Yeah, it was about like the changing of the years and like setting the story, specifically with Rebecca, but I don't know if maybe other ones are set in different years. Like that Rebecca's story is set in 1915. But the actual was in 1909.
Right. I'm going to speculate wildly. I was a Triangle Shirtwaist Fire Factory, like history kind of kid. Yes, my favorite fire. Yes. I mean, it was just really fascinated me as a kid. I was into Titanic. You know, I had all of these disasters really captivated me.
Greek mythology kid?
Yeah, Greek mythology. I feel like. And I don't know if that's specific to this specific incident happening on the Lower East Side, but I wondered if it was their way of kind of sidestepping years that they didn't want to address, or they thought, well, we're going to be compelled to talk about something that we don't feel prepared to talk about. Again, I am speculating wildly, to be clear. That is not, you should not quote me on that. But I don't know if that happened with other dolls. I'm not certain.
I can't think of any off the top of my head. Yeah, now I'm going to have to go back and...
This is interesting.
We'll keep in touch.
Oh, and there's someone over there.
Hi. This is one part testimony, one part question. And my girl is Kit here. For reference, my hair color used to be exactly this. And I was basically Kit's twin. So she was kind of a just like me doll without even really trying that hard.
Yeah.
And her being a journalist, if you don't know, that was her whole passion. She was determined to be a reporter. And that quite literally influenced me. Talking about turnips, I majored in journalism at UNC because of this doll, this plastic doll. I was obsessed with typewriters. I wanted to be a journalist and a writer so badly. And truly, I took her to college with me, like Toy Story and Andy, like that sort of situation. And she sat in her Carolina Blues school outfit on my dorm room shelf because she inspired me. And to this day, I work for UNC now. It's just sort of every bit of my career trajectory came from this doll, kind of like you're talking about historians. So yeah, that was the biggest impact for me, is my whole career and life trajectory came from a plastic doll. But it was the stories, it was everything about her as a person that made her feel real to me. And I felt incredibly seen by this doll because I looked exactly like her. My mom told me that I was going to play Kit in the movie. So when Abigail Breslin rolled up, I was not very happy. But the second part is my question, is I had this exact same idea when I was in college. I wanted to sit down and ask young women my own age or even older how American Girl had turned them into American women. And so my question in your research phase, did you find any sort of existing research that suggested that this generation of women around the mid-20s realm had their careers influenced, had their whole life trajectory, or things that they were passionate about, or if American Girl influenced them politically? Because I definitely think this girl radicalized me just a little bit. And my mom had no idea she was handing me feminist literature books, let me tell you. But she was handing me a feminist literature book. So if you had, in your research phase, did you find any evidence of that inspired you even further? And, just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So we already mentioned that one of the essays in the book talks about that from the historical perspective. And the author Tara, she also interviewed other contributors and was like, "Are you writing this because you also were obsessed with American Girl?" And they're like, "Yeah," most of them, anyways. And so we already had that kind of leveled there. But just based off of the meme accounts too, you have people that say, this doll radicalized me at age 9, or this particular book radicalized me, or whatever it may be. I think we have lots of newspaper evidence too of various types of the events that Marcy's referencing earlier at Colonial Williamsburg that just doubled down on events, especially with Felicity. And there were Felicity lookalike contests. There were all these different things, initiatives to get young girls interested in just anything to do with history. So we have this clear kind of foundation, and I think we have lots of anecdotal evidence. And but we also referenced this earlier, and it's also in this essay that as Tara said, it was kind of a silly thing to admit. And I think one of the big differences now in the academy and then outside of it is that it's not so silly anymore. This is something that we can laugh about. We can make all these jokes. We can write these little memes about them as well. But we can also take seriously the impact that these dolls have had, and where they might have failed us as well, and where we're still filling those gaps, or changing how we approach things with our own kids these days. How the care and keeping of you has changed quite a bit too.
I mentioned what that is for folks that
the care and keeping of you. How many people know? How many people learned about periods from the care and keeping of you?
Every hand raised.
So it's a book. So in addition to, so short answer is yes. The care and keeping of you was one of these books that the American Girl brand started when they started pivoting, realizing, girls need to learn more than just history. They need to know so much. And so they started putting out, we talked about the cookbooks and other things like that, manners, Girl's Guide to Manners, and there was Help. There was one that was just called Help, which I really liked. And then there was the Care and Keeping of You, which was very much written in the style of Our Bodies Ourselves. And but obviously for much younger people, and it was a very visual guide to how to handle your body, your changing body, whether it was to do with how to put in a tampon, or what to do, how to wash your face, which I think is really cool. And but it was very gendered, and it also included a lot of things that nowadays we know that 8 and 9-year-olds learn these parts, and then this other, when they're a little bit older, they learn these other aspects of what that means in terms of their bodies. And so, and now they have ones that are, gender neutral or geared towards boys. So it's a really,
It's amazing.
yeah, lots there. Thank you.
So I know that you put a lot of research into this book. I can tell just from reading like a singular page.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I want to know, what's the funniest or most unhinged results you've had when you're researching for this? Or something that sounded untrue?
Sounded untrue. All right. I gotta think on it.
I do feel that like learning that they were using this ethnicized facial mold that they decided was off-white, for lack of a better term. They're like, okay, this is the Jewish doll, it's the Irish doll, fill in the blank, we're not sure what we'll use this one for next, but we'll just have that on hold, was really wild. I mean, it felt like, obviously I know these are dolls, they literally have a mold, they are filled, they are plastic, but it does make you think, like, gosh, even in the last 25 years, they were still saying, this is what you slot into, this is what you slot into, you fit into a mold, for lack of a better term, or to use a cliche. I thought that was really fascinating. I had no idea the history of like what went into the decisions of how they make the dolls look the way they do.
And you can imagine corporate going, what are we going to make a doll for a new mold for every single person?
Right. So that, to me, I thought that was really unhinged, to use your word.
I think this isn't unhinged, but it is something that took up a lot of our time. And I mean this in the kindest way, and I'm not trying to throw any of our author under the bus, but Rebecca Rubin, our author Rebecca Rubin, we were like, oh my God, this was meant to be.
Yeah.
And she did not want to talk about it. And so for me, that was the really,
that they had the same
names. And that was, I guess that's my most unhinged moment, was I was just like, we've got to acknowledge this.
You got to say something once.
Otherwise, people are going to think it's a typo.
Right, or that you use a pen name, but we got there
in the end. We made it clear, like, we think this is the coolest
and she's wonderful.
thing. She's wonderful. And yeah, didn't take away from her article at all.
No.
I'll have to think of some juicier answers. Come back to us in another month or so, and we'll have some better things.
That's a great question.
Let's end with these two questions, right?
All right, thank you.
Hi. Oh, I did want to say one thing about, I have a question and I also have a statement. That I don't remember the title of the article or the author, unfortunately, but we did, for our children's literature class at UNC, talk about restorying, which is like making a space for yourself in a story. So much like people, like the author who said that she made Molly and Samantha indigenous. Similarly, my friend, she's Indian. She wanted Samantha as a kid because Samantha had the darkest hair. And yeah, so there's an academic term for that, restorying.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then my question is, okay, so Enon Crates, Mr. Mattel himself calls you, Justine and Casey, and says, okay, you guys are going to make the next American Girl doll, the next historical. What do you pitch?
Oh my gosh.
And they're going to make it.
You should have walked a lot slower. Maybe some time to think. Gosh, Casey, go.
I want a doll that is a kid of like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, like in the fields, like with the grape boycotts, and these grapes have blood on their leaves from like the 60s and 70s. This is like pure food scholar indulgence here, and it would basically be like a kid. So it would most likely be Latin American, South American immigrant, and is having to go to the fields with her parents picking all of our food, and like kind of those struggles, but then that would also obviously correlate to contemporary young children who are doing those exact same things.
Oh.
I should call him. And I've got this ready.
Yeah, you were ready with an answer. That is the answer. Yeah. No, that's the answer. That's the answer. We gotta get to make sure we get everyone's questions in.
Probably should have ended with that question. It was mine. So I may be the only one with Just Like You doll at the moment. I don't know who else has them.
We'll circle up later.
Yeah. I tend to write and restory my own dolls.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do that one with this doll right now. But I just wanted to hear your opinions on the Just Like Me, Truly Me brand, because it doesn't seem like it's pushing the emphasis towards it and throwing out the historical part.
Yeah. So I know that when that line was introduced, this was a way that folks could have a doll that looked like them who weren't seeing themselves represented in the historical lineup. It's true now as well that they're different. I mean, they're very much American Girl dolls, but it is true that it feels to me like there's more of an emphasis on the accessories that you're going to buy them to how are you going to represent yourself through items. And so there is that material culture element, but it's also like now you can buy a tiny American Girl doll for your doll. So you're like, great, I guess my doll loves Kirsten and now she has a tiny, it's very self-referential, I think. Yeah. So it's a great question because I think that, well, here, Casey, you look like you have something.
I think in terms of like what's talked about in our book too, what I think where that most pops up was in the chapter that talks about disability representation. Yeah. And she's talking about it, the author, in the books more so, but she does touch on the dolls themselves and how the Be Forever line really, or not Be Forever, BU, how that really changed. Yeah. True. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
Keep changing the
names. There's so many names. Yeah. How those really allowed folks to really customize in these ways, not just hair color and things like that, but you can buy a cochlear implant and things that are a little bit more unseen, but also wheelchairs and things like that. So she does talk about that, but those are very very obvious kind of changes. So she talks about it briefly, but I think this is one of the things that was changing so much too, that was hard to really keep track of it all. So again, part 2.
And actually there is, so I don't think this is a little bit to the side of what you asked, but Mary Ellen was a historical character introduced who had, was what? Tell me later. That she had survived polio and so now, was living with some of the effects of that still, but also there's a push, right, to remind kids what it was like before we had vaccines for these kinds of things. So, there's that political edge in that too. And I think that, it's fabulous that people can create something that looks like them. I think with that edge of being encouraged to do so via like items you can buy for the doll that just, I love seeing the creativity too. I mean, I think that's certainly part of the book as well, is folks who are making things for their doll. Not that that's inherently better or more pure, but rather like American Girl wasn't making the thing I was looking for, so I'm going to do this for myself and for my doll, and to create a character that means something to me. So
and add this to the restory.
Exactly. Yeah, which is a great term. Thank you for giving us that.
Yeah, I think that's all.
Yeah. I just want to thank these two for editing this incredible book. Casey Hysmith, Justine incredible gift to us all. It's really about young girls and women being empowered, through this work and doing it, as much as you can on your own as well. Yeah. And so we'll gather together those folks that have dolls.
Yeah, I'd like dolls.